My name is Dominic Okafor. I'm 29 years old. And what happened in the next 10 minutes? I genuinely didn't plan any of it. But I'll get there. First, you need to understand how we got to a moment where a 58-year-old man felt comfortable handing his nephew a trash bag at a family wedding in front of 40 people. Because that moment didn't come from nowhere. It had been years in the making, and I had let it happen. Not because I was weak, but because for a long time I genuinely didn't know what else to do. My dad came to Canada from Nigeria in 1989 with 2 suitcases, a chemistry degree, and a plan that took about 3 years longer than expected to work out. He settled in Brampton, Ontario, married my mom, Patricia, a Jamaican-Canadian woman from Mississauga who had opinions about everything and apologized for none of them. And they built something real, slowly, the way most immigrants do. Quietly, without fanfare, without anyone handing them anything. We weren't rich. We weren't poor either. Somewhere in the middle, in a detached house on a street where everyone mowed their lawn on Saturday mornings and pretended not to watch each other through the front windows. My dad worked in pharmaceutical distribution. My mom was a medical office administrator. They worked hard. They paid their bills. They showed up to everything that mattered. That was the household I grew up in. My dad had a brother, Terrence, who had also come to Canada a few years later and who had, in his own telling, built an empire. Terrence ran a property management company in Scarborough. He drove a Range Rover. His wife, my Aunt Gloria, wore jewelry that caught the light from across a room and had a laugh that was always slightly too loud for whatever space she was in. Their son Marcus was 2 years older than me and had gone to Ryerson for business. Their daughter Nadine was studying law. Terrence never let us forget any of this. Not once. Family dinners at their house, which happened 4 or 5 times a year, always at their house because hosting was apparently a form of status, were long, uncomfortable events where Terrence found ways to steer every conversation back to his property portfolio, his contacts, the mayor's gala he'd been invited to. My dad would sit and nod. My mom would smile her particular smile, the one that meant she was cataloging everything for later. I would sit between my younger sisters Janelle and Kimmy and count down the minutes until we could leave. I was a decent student. Not exceptional. Not the kind whose teachers called home with excitement. But I worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and got into York University for communications, which felt like a real thing at the time. Here's where I need to be honest, because this story doesn't work if I'm not. I didn't have a plan. I had a degree program that interested me and a vague idea that something would figure itself out. And when I graduated at 22, in the middle of a job market that had very little interest in vague ideas, something did not, in fact, figure itself out. I applied to everything. Communications coordinator roles, marketing assistant positions, PR firms, media companies, content agencies. 200 resumes over 8 months. 11 interviews. 0 offers. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because that's what actually happened, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. My parents were patient. My dad never once made me feel ashamed. But the rent was real, and the student loan was real, and I couldn't keep sleeping in my childhood bedroom, watching my mom worry when she thought I wasn't looking. So I took a job cleaning offices. A company called Pristine Works, commercial cleaning services for corporate clients. I wore a gray uniform, carried a cart, cleaned boardrooms and bathrooms and break rooms in office towers downtown. Usually 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning. The pay was decent, the team was solid, and, this is the part people never want to hear, I was good at it. Efficient, reliable, never missed a shift. Within 4 months my supervisor had put me on the premium client rotation. High-end offices, law firms, financial companies. Clients who paid more and expected more. But none of that mattered to my family's perception of me. Not even a little. The first time Terrence called me a failure, he didn't use that exact word. He was more careful then. It was a Sunday dinner at his house, about 6 months after I'd started at Pristine Works. Marcus asked what I was up to these days. Working, I said. Commercial cleaning. Pays the bills while I figure out the next thing. Terrence set down his fork. He had this way of pausing before he spoke, like he wanted you to know the pause was intentional. Cleaning, he said. Yeah. After 4 years of university. Yeah. He picked his fork back up. Well, he said, not everyone finds their path right away. He said it kindly enough that my dad smiled in relief. But the kindness was decorative, and everyone at the table could feel it. That was the beginning. Over the next year, it became a pattern. Every family gathering, Terrence would find a way to work my job into the conversation. Not aggressively. Never aggressively, because Terrence was too smart for that, too aware of how he wanted to be perceived. It was always through a question, a comparison, a comment that technically could have been interpreted charitably if you squinted hard enough. "Dominic, how's the cleaning business?" said in front of his colleague's son who had just started at a Bay Street firm. Marcus was telling me about a communications firm that's hiring. "Dominic, you should probably look into that," said while Marcus was mid-sentence about his own job, so everyone turned to look at me. "I don't know, Pat. Maybe he just needs more time. Some people bloom later," said to my mother, about me, while I was sitting 3 feet away. Gloria was somehow worse than Terrence, because she had this gift of wrapping condescension in warmth. She would look at me with big, sympathetic eyes and squeeze my arm and say things like, "There's no shame in starting small, sweetheart," with so much tenderness it took a second to feel the blade inside the sentence. Marcus was distantly polite, the way you're polite to someone you've categorized as irrelevant. He'd ask about my life with the tone of someone asking as a formality, already thinking about the next topic. The extended family. The aunts, uncles, cousins who showed up at Christmas and Easter and the occasional summer barbecue had absorbed Terrence's version of me. Without me doing anything to accelerate it, the story of Dominic the failure had spread through the family network like something in groundwater. Slow, invisible, everywhere. I'd show up at events, and there would be this particular energy. People would be kind, but their kindness had an undertone, the kind you extend to someone you feel sorry for. Relatives would ask about my job with careful neutrality, the same neutrality you use when you ask someone about their divorce or their medical situation. I was 23, then 24, then 25. Still cleaning offices. Still living with my parents, though I was paying real rent now. Actual market rate, not a token amount, because I needed that for myself. For some sense of dignity, if I'm being honest about it. Here's the thing about being labeled, you start to feel it. Even when you know it's wrong. Even when you can see clearly that the people labeling you have their own complicated reasons for needing you to stay small. There would be nights after those family dinners, driving home alone, city lights blurring past, where I'd run the same loop. Am I doing this wrong? Is there something I'm missing? Some door I forgot to knock on? That loop sounds like self-reflection. It isn't. It's someone else's story about you playing on repeat inside your own head. Let me tell you about a few specific moments, because this is where people either recognize what I'm describing or they don't. Christmas. I was 24. Terrence had organized a gift exchange with a $75 limit. I found a good bottle of whiskey my dad had mentioned once and a set of coffee beans for my aunt. Terrence unwrapped his gift. I'd drawn his name and examined the whiskey bottle with a polite smile. "Oh, very nice," in the tone of a man who has a private cellar and is trying not to show it. Then he gave me mine. A hardcover copy of a book called The Career Comeback, Restarting Your Professional Life After Setbacks. He'd written inside the cover, "For Dominic, with hope and encouragement." Uncle T. My mom made a sound that wasn't quite a word. My dad looked at his lap. I said thank you, put the book under the tree, and didn't look at it again all evening. Easter. Marcus announced his promotion. He'd been made junior partner at his company. Legitimately impressive. He was 26 and had worked for it. The table erupted. Champagne came out. Terrence made a toast. Gloria cried. I clapped and meant it, because I'm not a monster. Then Terrence looked down the table at me, while everyone was still warm from the toast, and said, "Dominic, we're still waiting for your good news, son." He laughed. Most people laughed, following his lead. My mom's jaw tightened by maybe 2 millimeters. I smiled and said I was working on it. "Don't wait too long," Terrence said, already turning back to Marcus. "Time moves fast." A summer barbecue. One of my dad's cousins visiting from England, a man named Errol I barely knew, asked what I did. I told him. He looked confused for a second, then said, "But didn't you go to university?" Before I could answer, Terrence called over from 6 feet away. "That's the mystery we're all still working on, Errol." Laughter. There was always laughter. Terrence had this way of making his cruelty entertaining, so other people became complicit before they realized, and by the time they did the moment had passed, and laughing along had felt easier than the alternative. I stood there with a plate of jerk chicken I hadn't started eating, and I thought, very clearly, he has been doing this for 2 years, and he will keep doing this, and nothing I say will change it. That was the first crack in something. Not a breaking point. Just the first moment I looked at the situation with any clarity. Here's what was happening during those years that nobody at those family dinners knew about, because I'd stopped telling them things, and they'd stopped asking. About 18 months into working at Pristine Works, I was promoted to shift supervisor. Managing a team of 8, coordinating schedules, handling client complaints, doing quality control. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real management experience, and I was good at it in ways that surprised me. Turns out I'm organized. I'm good at reading people. I can stay calm when things go sideways, which in commercial cleaning happens more than you'd think. I also started noticing things about the business itself. The margins, the client relationships, the inefficiencies being left on the table. I'd always been decent at communications. That degree had to be useful for something. And I started thinking about the gap between how cleaning companies presented themselves and how much higher they could position themselves in the market. High-end commercial cleaning was a different product than what most companies were selling. There was a way to rebrand the whole experience, charge appropriately for premium service, attract clients who valued reliability over whoever gave the lowest quote. I started taking notes. Bought a couple of business books, not the career self-help nonsense Terrence had given me, but actual business strategy. Took an online course, then another. Opened a spreadsheet that started as a rough idea and slowly became something more structured. When I was 26, I registered a business. Apex Facility Solutions. Just me, a used van I bought for $8,000, and 3 clients I'd cultivated quietly and professionally by delivering better service than they'd seen before and asking, when the moment was right, if they'd consider working with me directly. I didn't tell anyone in my family. Not from bitterness, not a strategy. I want to be clear about that. I didn't tell them because I had learned through years of evidence that telling them things early only gave them a chance to diminish those things before they had a chance to become real. I had watched Terrence take the small, hopeful things I'd mentioned and compress them into punchlines. I wasn't giving him the opportunity to do that with this. My mom knew something was shifting because she is not a person who misses things. She asked once, carefully, if I was doing okay. I told her I was. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, all right, and didn't push, which was its own kind of love. First year with Apex, $67,000. Less than I'd been making with salary and benefits at Pristine Works. But I was building something, and the trajectory was the point. I hired 2 part-time workers. Landed 2 more commercial clients. One of them a mid-size accounting firm that had been through 3 cleaning companies in 2 years and was genuinely relieved to find someone who showed up, communicated, and solved problems without needing to be chased. Year 2, $140,000 in revenue. I moved out of my parents' house. Rented a 1-bedroom in Etobicoke. Nothing spectacular, but it was mine. I painted the bedroom wall dark green, a color I'd seen somewhere and always liked. Bought real furniture. Sat in the kitchen in the mornings with coffee and felt something I could only describe as quiet. My family still thought I was cleaning offices. I want to be careful here because I don't want to make myself sound like a saint during these years. I wasn't. I had nights where I was genuinely furious, chest tight, jaw clenched furious, about the way I'd been treated. I had family events I dreaded for days in advance that left me in a bad mood I had to actively work my way out of. I vented to my friend Theo, who had clearly heard this story 30 times and kept listening anyway. I had a period around 27 where I nearly picked a fight with Terrence at Thanksgiving, had the whole response planned in my head, the specific moment of his specific condescension where I was going to push back, hard, publicly. I didn't. Partly because I knew it wouldn't change anything. Partly because my grandmother was there, and she was 81 and didn't need that at dinner. But I want you to know the fury existed. It wasn't serenity. It was a decision, and decisions cost something. What helped, more than I expected, was the work. The business gave me something entirely mine to put my energy into. Every client I retained, every good month, every problem I solved. These things existed independently of what my family thought of me. They didn't need Terrence's approval to be real. They just were real. I found that almost shocking the first few times. How something could just be real and be enough. I also made real friends, finally. People who knew my actual life, not the edited version I presented to family. My team at Apex, my clients, people from an entrepreneurship networking group in Etobicoke. These people understood what I was building because they were building things too. Nobody was performing at those dinners. Just genuine interest in each other's problems and wins. It was different from anything I'd had in the family context. I started feeling less like I was waiting for my real life to begin. This was my real life. The van, the team, the spreadsheets, the clients, the green bedroom wall, the quiet mornings. This was it, and it was enough. Brianna's wedding invitation arrived in February. Her fiancé was a man named Garrett. She was a dental hygienist. He was a physiotherapist. They'd been together for years. The wedding was in May, a Saturday, at a venue in Mississauga. I said yes. Bought a good suit. Charcoal gray, not rented. Got a haircut the day before. got them a kitchen stand mixer from the registry, and wrote an actual card because my mother raised me right. I was not thinking about Terrence when I got dressed that morning. I was just going to my cousin's wedding. I should have known he'd find a way to make an impression. He always did. The Whitmore was a converted textile mill in Mississauga, one of those old industrial buildings that someone with money and good taste had decided to turn into an event space. Exposed brick, original timber beams across the ceiling, tall factory windows running along one wall that let in the kind of afternoon light that makes everything look better than it probably is. String lights strung between the beams. Flowers I couldn't name that clearly cost someone a significant amount per stem. It was a good space. Well-proportioned, well-run. You could feel both within 5 minutes of walking in. I arrived 20 minutes early because I genuinely cannot help it. Parked around the back and came in through the side entrance, which meant walking past the service corridor that ran along the east side of the building, the back-of-house hallway connecting the kitchen to the loading area, where all the invisible logistics of a large event actually happen. Walking past, I noticed the service door at the far end wasn't sitting flush. The seal on the lower corner was compressed wrong, leaving a thin gap between the door and the frame. Outside air coming through. In a catering operation trying to hold food temperatures over a 4-hour service, that kind of thing adds up slowly, and then suddenly. I noted it the way I note everything in a building I walk through, automatically, without deciding to, and then moved on, because it wasn't my building. I found Brianna in a side room off the main hall entrance. She had maybe 3 minutes before her maid of honor swept her away, but she used them well. She hugged me, thanked me for coming, and looked genuinely beautiful in the way people do on their wedding day when they're actually certain about the person they're marrying. Her shoulders were relaxed. She was breathing normally. Those two things tell you more than the dress does. Found my seat. Table 7, near the kitchen, close enough that I could hear the controlled noise behind the swing doors every time a server pushed through. During cocktail hour, I got a drink from the bar and noticed, not looking for it, just noticing, that the sink drained with a half-second hesitation. Slow drain. Minor now, worse later when volume picked up. Filed that away. Got my drink. Found Harold, Garrett's uncle from Hamilton, who had strong opinions about the Leafs and good enough company that I stuck near him through the whole cocktail hour. The ceremony was at 3. Brianna and Garrett said their vows in front of those factory windows. A few people cried, and I didn't, but it was close. Dinner at 6. The catering team ran it cleanly, courses timed right, nothing sitting too long. Whoever was running the kitchen knew what they were doing. By the time the main course arrived, the table had settled into itself. Harold on my left, Stephanie on my right, one of Brianna's dental hygiene colleagues, funny in the dry, precise way that makes a long dinner go fast. Marcus across from me, mostly on his phone. Gloria doing her particular thing of making conversation feel like something she was carefully distributing. Terrence had been to the bar twice before appetizers and once during. I tracked this the way you track ambient weather. Not obsessing, just aware. I was genuinely having a decent evening. Not performing it. Actually having one. The moment happened about 90 minutes into the reception, somewhere between the main course and dessert, when the room had loosened and people had started moving between tables. I'd just come back from throwing away a soaked cocktail napkin at the bin near the kitchen entrance. A 30-second errand, nothing, and Terrence was returning from the bar. We converged at the end of table 7 at the same moment. He stopped, drink in one hand. With the other, he reached under the catering station at the end of the table, a folding setup where the venue staff had staged extra supplies, spare napkins, a box of items for the service. He reached in and pulled out a black trash bag, folded flat, held it out toward me. 2 fingers. Casual, like he was passing the salt. Dominic. Loud enough to cut through the table's conversation. People looked up. Since you're so used to this kind of work, might as well put that degree to use. The table went quiet. Not the whole room. Just ours. That small radius where it landed. Harold stopped mid-reach for his wine glass. Stephanie went silent mid-sentence. Gloria's expression did something careful and deliberate that I recognized as her having decided not to intervene. A couple of people laughed. The uncomfortable kind. The exhale kind. The kind that fills a silence because silence feels worse. Marcus looked at his plate. Brianna, close enough to hear, looked down at her champagne glass and traced the rim with one finger. Said nothing. Terrence was still holding the bag out toward me, still smiling. I took it. Didn't hold eye contact long enough to make it a standoff. Just took the bag from his hand the way you take something that's been handed to you, gave a small nod, and stood up. Excuse me, I said, and walked toward the back of the room. I want to be honest about what was actually going through my head when I walked away from that table. because it wasn't anything dramatic. It was mostly just, get away from there. That was the complete thought. Not a plan, not a strategy. Just the basic instinct of a person who has absorbed something painful in public and needs 30 seconds where nobody is looking at them. I ended up near the kitchen entrance because it was the back corner of the room, away from the dance floor setup and the main guest traffic. Quieter. A server came through the swing door, clocked me standing there, held it out of politeness, and kept moving. Through the gap, I caught a second of the kitchen, controlled noise, someone calling out a table number, the focused energy of people mid-service who are managing but not comfortable. I stood there with the bag in my hand. I don't know how long exactly. Long enough that I started feeling slightly ridiculous, standing in a suit outside a wedding kitchen, holding a folded trash bag. I wasn't going to use it. I hadn't planned to use it. I just hadn't put it down yet, because I'd been busy trying to look like a person who hadn't just been publicly humiliated by his uncle at his cousin's wedding. What happened next wasn't a decision so much as a default. My brain, which had apparently been running its own quiet audit of this building since I arrived, surfaced the two things I'd noticed and filed away. The service door seal, the slow bar drain, and just presented them, the way it always does, like a background process finishing. I wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. I was thinking that I was standing next to a kitchen, and I knew something useful, and standing there doing nothing felt worse than saying something. I knocked on the door frame. The woman with the headset looked up. Late 30s, clipboard, the body language of someone who'd been on her feet since noon and had 4 more hours to go. Sorry, I said. I'm a guest. I'm not trying to cause problems, but your service door on the east side isn't sealing right. Lower corner. You've got outside air coming in, which will affect your hot hold temps over a long service. She looked at me for a second. You're a guest. Yeah. I run a facility management company. Commercial maintenance. I noticed it when I came in and figured it was worth mentioning. She didn't dismiss it. She tilted her head slightly. What else? Bar sink on the main floor is draining slow. Not urgent right now, but later in the night when volume picks up you'll feel it. She held up one finger, turned slightly, spoke into her headset. About 40 seconds later the swing door opened and a man came through. Mid-40s, dark blazer, the composed, unhurried quality of someone who manages high-pressure events for a living and has learned that urgency and panic are different things. He extended his hand. James Whitfield, Operations Director. Kara said you flagged a couple of issues. Dominic Okafor. Yeah, I don't want to turn your event into a maintenance call. I just noticed 2 things and figured saying something was better than not. He nodded. Something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically, just a small adjustment, like he was recategorizing the conversation. Okafor. He said it like he was trying to place it. Did your company submit a proposal to us? Few months back? That I hadn't expected. Yeah, about 6 months ago. He looked at me a beat longer. I've been meaning to follow up on that. We've had some reliability issues with our current contractor. I know how that goes, I said. That got a short exhale that was almost a laugh. He asked how long I'd been running Apex. Asked about revenue. Efficiently, the way operations people do when they're establishing whether a conversation is worth having. I answered. He nodded at the numbers without performing a reaction, which I respected. And you're here as a guest tonight. My cousin's wedding. He shook his head slightly, the expression of someone finding something either funny or improbable. Let me go check what you flagged. Give me a few minutes. He went back through the door. I stood in the corridor. I still had the trash bag, so I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket because I genuinely didn't know what else to do with it. He was gone longer than I expected. 8, maybe 9 minutes. Long enough that I started thinking I should just go back to the table. I was on the verge of that when the door opened again. James came back with a slightly different energy. More settled. Like he'd confirmed something. East door seal. You're right. We didn't catch it. Don't know how long it's been like that. Bar drain is slower than it should be. We'll get someone on it before dessert service. He paused, then shifted register slightly. I also need to ask you about something. One of our staff flagged a situation at table 7. A guest accessing the supply station. I looked at him. I'm not putting you in a difficult position, he said. But if a guest took materials from our catering setup and used them in a way that made another guest uncomfortable, that's something we have to address. It's part of how we document events and protect all our guests. I thought about it for a second, about whether I actually wanted this addressed or whether I just wanted my evening and to go home. My uncle took the bag from the supply station, I said, held it out to me, and made a comment about my job. I took the bag and walked away. James kept his expression steady. What kind of comment? I told him. Not dramatically, just the words as they happened. He was quiet for a moment. Did other guests hear it? Most of the table. He nodded once. Not like he was surprised. More like he was confirming something he'd already started to suspect. Okay, I'm going to go address it. Said the way you say something when the decision was made a few sentences ago. And for what it's worth, that's not an experience any guest should have at an event in this venue. I didn't come back here looking for that, I said. I know, he said, but it still applies. He held out his hand. Can I get your card? I want to have that proposal conversation properly. Not tonight, but I'd like to. I gave him my card. He looked at it, looked back at me, and something behind his eyes did that quiet recalibration again. I'll be in touch, he said, and walked back out toward the main hall. I stayed in the corridor for another minute, not thinking about anything particular. Then I went back to the table the long way, around the edge of the dance floor, past the bar. I was just sitting there when James crossed the main hall toward our table. The plates had been cleared, dessert was done, the dancing had started at the far end of the room. Our table had thinned out a little. A couple of people had drifted toward the dance floor. Harold had gone to talk to someone he recognized from across the room. It was that loose winding down part of a reception where nobody's quite sure if they're staying or leaving. I had my wine glass in front of me, mostly empty. I wasn't really doing anything with it. I kept my face pointed forward and watched James from the edge of my vision. He stopped at the end of our table. Terrence saw him coming and did what he always does with approaching strangers, straightened slightly, arranged his face into the version that's ready to receive importance. The automatic response of a man who has decided most interactions are either opportunities or inconveniences and sorts them quickly. James said something. I couldn't hear it. The room was still loud, music underneath everything, the table behind me going at full volume. I got the shape of the conversation, not the words. Terrence nodded along at first, still comfortable, still in the mode of a man who assumes things resolve in his favor. Then his posture changed. Subtle, just the shoulders coming up a fraction, chin lifting slightly. He said something back, and I could see from the way his mouth moved it was explanatory. Laying out context. The reasonable version of events. The joke, probably. Family humor. Nothing serious. James responded. Short. Terrence tried again, differently this time. The hand coming up off the table, the slight forward lean of a man who believes he's not being properly understood, that if the other person just had the full picture they'd see this differently. James didn't move. Didn't lean in, didn't lean back. Just stood there and let Terrence finish. Said something else. Even shorter. That's when Terrence got louder. I felt the change in register more than heard specific words. That familiar volume. The one meant to sound like authority. The one that at family dinners made people go quiet and nod. Here it just sounded like a man getting loud in a room where that wasn't welcome. The woman at the next table glanced over. Looked away quickly. Gloria had gone very still beside him in the way she does when she's calculating. She placed her hand near his on the table, not grabbing it, just placing it there. The signal she uses when she wants him to pull back without making it obvious she's doing it. He didn't pull back. Brianna had been near the dance floor talking to one of Garrett's relatives. I saw her turn her head toward our table. She couldn't have made out the words from that distance, but she felt it, that shift in the air when something at a nearby table goes wrong. She took a couple of steps toward us without fully deciding to. I could see it in how she moved. James just waited. That was the thing I kept watching. He just waited, completely still, while Terrence said whatever he was saying. Didn't shift his weight, didn't glance around the room, didn't do anything to suggest the volume or the tone was landing on him in any particular way. When Terrence finished, James said something. 4 or 5 words from the look of it. Terrence went very still. Not the relaxed kind. The kind that's a person hearing something they weren't prepared for and needing a second they don't want you to see them take. Gloria's hand moved from the table to his arm properly now. Terrence said something else, short, not explanatory, different in character from everything before it. His name, his company, something that was meant to function as leverage. You could see him trying to find the thing that would shift James's expression. It didn't shift. Whatever James said back was brief and final in the way some sentences just are. You can see it happen in the other person's body before their face catches up. Terrence sat back in his chair. Not dramatically. Just back, and down, and quiet. Gloria was already managing it. Hand properly on his arm, saying something low near his ear, her face arranged into the expression she keeps for exactly these moments. Running the rest of the evening as planned, even while the plan had shifted under her. Marcus had his phone face down on the table and was looking at the middle distance. James said something brief to the table generally. A couple of people nodded. Then he turned and walked back toward the kitchen corridor. He passed within a few feet of where I was sitting. Didn't look at me. I think that was deliberate, keeping it clean, giving me nothing to react to. Harold had come back to the table at some point during all of this. He settled into his chair, looked at his empty dessert plate, then looked up at nothing in particular and said quietly, to the air in front of him more than to anyone specifically, "Good man." Then he reached for his water glass like he hadn't said anything at all. I looked at him. He didn't look back. Something in my chest loosened slightly. Just slightly. The table reassembled itself around the silence the way tables do after something is passed. Carefully, tentatively. People finding their conversations again, like picking up dropped stitches. Terrence sat with his drink and said nothing. Gloria talked warmly to the person on her other side, laughing at something, touching someone's arm. She was good at that. Always had been. Marcus picked his phone back up. I sat with my empty wine glass and watched Brianna and Garrett have their first dance from across the room. Midway through the song, he said something to her, and she laughed. A real one, sudden and unguarded, the kind you can't manufacture. She pressed her face briefly against his shoulder, still laughing. I watched that and thought, whatever else this evening had been, that part was exactly right. I stayed for about an hour of dancing after that. Said my goodbyes around the room slowly, the way you do when you're not in a rush to leave, but know it's time. When I got to Brianna, she was near the coat check, slightly apart from the main crowd for a moment. She saw me coming and touched her new husband's arm, said something to him, and he nodded, and she stepped toward me. She pulled me slightly to the side, near the factory windows, away from the drift of people passing. She still had her champagne glass. She looked tired in the good way, the way you look at the end of your own wedding when everything went right and you're finally allowed to feel it. She looked at me for a second before she said anything, like she was figuring out where to start. "James came and found me," she said, after he left the table. "He wanted me to know what happened." I waited. "He said a guest had accessed the catering supply station and taken venue property." That's how he framed it first. Very careful, very professional. She paused. "Then he told me what Terrence said to you." I didn't say anything. "Dom, I heard it. I was right there, and I said nothing, and I've been feeling sick about that all night." "Brianna." "No, just let me." She stopped, took a breath. "James said he went to the table and explained the supply station policy. That taking items from it wasn't permitted for guests. That the comment made when handing the bag to you had been observed by multiple people at the table, and it was a guest conduct issue." "What did Terrence say?" She exhaled slowly. "He said it was a joke. Family humor. That you wouldn't have minded." I nodded. "James told him intent doesn't change the other person's experience." She almost smiled at that, briefly, without humor. "Terrence didn't like that. He got louder. Started talking about knowing the family, about his name, his business contacts. I don't know exactly. I'd stood up by that point and moved closer without really meaning to. "I saw you," I said. James just waited for him to finish. Didn't say anything, didn't react. Just waited. And then he told Terrence that none of that was relevant to the situation, and that for the remainder of the program he'd appreciate it if Terrence remained at his table and allowed the evening to continue without further incident. She paused. And that if that wasn't something he was comfortable with, they could discuss his continued attendance at the event. I was quiet for a moment. Continued attendance. Yeah. She looked at me. Terrence went completely still when he heard that. I've never seen him go still like that. Gloria grabbed his arm, and he just sat back down. I looked out the factory window at the dark parking lot. A couple walking to their car, the woman carrying her heels. Then James found me, Brianna continued. Apologized on behalf of the venue. Said no guest should experience what you experienced tonight. She paused. He also mentioned that you'd flagged 2 maintenance issues when you went back to the kitchen. That you'd given him your card. That he was going to follow up on a proposal your company had submitted. She said that last part slowly, like she was still putting something together. Dom. She looked at me directly now. Are you actually doing well? Because I've been sitting at that table all night thinking I know what you do, and apparently I don't know anything. I thought about how to answer. Not the deflection. Not the version I give at family dinners. The actual answer. Yeah, I said. I'm actually doing well. She held my gaze for a second, deciding whether to push further. Then she just nodded, slowly, like something was settling for her. She hugged me then. Tight, and a moment longer than a normal goodbye hug. I'm sorry I didn't say something at the table, she said quietly. I should have. It's your wedding night, I said. Don't carry that. She pulled back and looked at me one more time. Then someone called her name from across the room, and she squeezed my arm and went. I got my jacket from the coat check and walked out through the side entrance into the parking lot. The night air was cool after the warmth inside. I could still hear the music faintly through the walls, something with a bass line, people still dancing. I I stood outside for a second, just breathing the cool air, and then walked to my car. I sat in it without starting it. Just sat there, the way you do at the end of a long evening when you're not quite ready to move yet. I put my hand in my jacket pocket and found the trash bag, still folded, still there. I'd forgotten about it completely. I held it for a second. This small folded square of black plastic that had somehow been the center of the whole evening. And then I put it on the passenger seat and looked at it. Then I started the car and drove home on the 401 with the windows cracked and the radio on something I wasn't really listening to. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired, mostly, in the way you feel tired after a day that required more of you than you'd planned for. But underneath that there was something else, something steadier. The feeling of a person who had been tested in a specific way and had not become what the test wanted them to become. I got home around 11:30, hung up the suit, put the trash bag on my desk, made tea I didn't really want and drank half of it standing at the kitchen counter looking at nothing. Then I went to bed. I didn't lie awake replaying it. That surprised me, because for years that had been exactly what I did after family events. Drive home, get into bed, spend an hour running the night back through my head, finding the moments, building the responses I didn't give, having the whole conversation again with a better version of myself in the starring role. That night I just didn't. I was tired. I closed my eyes and slept. James Whitfield emailed on the Wednesday after the wedding. 3 sentences. He'd reviewed the Apex proposal from 6 months ago, thought there was a conversation worth having. Was I available for coffee the following week? I read it at my kitchen table before work and put the phone face down and sat there for a moment. Not from shock. More like needing a second to let something land properly before I reacted to it. I emailed back that evening. Thursday worked. I knew a place near the venue if that was easier for him. We met at a coffee shop on Huron, Ontario. James was already there when I arrived. The proposal printout was on the table in front of him, annotated in the margins in small, precise handwriting. He'd actually read it. Not skimmed it, read it. That told me something before he opened his mouth. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. About Apex, about what we'd built, about the specific problems the Whitmore had been having with their current contractor. Missed visits, inconsistent staff, the particular frustration of chasing a supplier who doesn't call back. I knew that frustration from the client side. I'd inherited accounts from people who'd been burned before and arrived skeptical and needed to be shown rather than told. James asked good questions. The kind that come from someone who understands operations, who has managed enough vendors to know what the real issues are versus the surface ones. I answered directly, no overselling, no padding. The client's worth having can smell overselling, and it costs you before you've even started. By the end of the coffee, he said he wanted to move forward. Properly. He was careful about that, said he'd need to run the process, get the paperwork right, loop in his operations team. But the intent was clear, and so was he. We shook hands outside on the pavement. He said he'd have the contract draft to me by end of next week. I'll look for it, I said. I walked back to my car and sat in it for a minute before starting it. Same thing I'd done in the parking lot at the Whitmore 5 days earlier. Just sitting, letting something be real before I moved on from it. The Whitmore contract came through 3 weeks later. Monthly maintenance and deep clean, 3-year agreement, renewal option. The kind of client that changes the character of your portfolio, not just the revenue, though the revenue was significant, but the name. The Whitmore was the kind of venue that other venues knew. Having them on your client list opened a different set of doors than the ones I'd been knocking on before. I signed the contract at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning with a coffee going cold next to me, and then sat there for a while before I got up. I didn't tell anyone that day. I just sat with it for a bit. Some things you need to sit with before they become a story you tell. Within 6 weeks of starting the Whitmore contract, I had 2 inquiries from other venues in the same network. A wedding space in Oakville, a corporate event facility in downtown Mississauga. Both came through James mentioning Apex to people he knew. Not a sales pitch, just a recommendation from someone whose opinion the other person trusted. That's how the best referrals always happen. I brought on 2 more full-time staff that summer. People I'd been watching for a while, reliable workers who I knew would represent the company the way it needed to be represented at a client like the Whitmore. I was specific about that in the hiring, not just skill, but professional presence. That matters more than most people think. I moved Apex out of my apartment, found a small office space in a business park in Etobicoke. Plain door in a plain building, but it had a meeting room for client conversations and a proper workspace for the administrative side. Bought a second van, got the company name printed on both of them properly, not the magnetic signs I'd been using, actual vinyl lettering. Small thing. Felt significant. Revenue that year crossed 400,000. I turned 30 in August. My parents took me to dinner, just the three of us, a restaurant my dad had been wanting to try in Mississauga. White tablecloths, the kind of menu where everything has a description. My dad ordered a bottle of wine, and when it came he lifted his glass and didn't make a speech. Just said, quietly, the way my dad says things that matter, "We're proud of you, son." That was the whole toast. I had to look at the table for a second before I could respond. I told them that night. All of it. The full picture of what Apex actually was, the revenue, the Whitmore contract, the new staff, the office. My mom listened with her hands folded on the table, and about halfway through, she put one hand over her mouth and kept it there until I finished. Then she said, "Dominic, why didn't you tell us?" It wasn't really a question. I needed it to be real first, I said. Before I told anyone. I needed to know it was actually real. My dad looked at me across the table for a long moment. "It's real," he said. "We stayed at that restaurant for 3 hours. Ordered dessert we didn't finish. Talked about things that had nothing to do with any of this. Normal things. Good things. Driving home that night, I felt something I'd been chasing for a long time without knowing exactly what I was chasing. Not triumph. Not vindication. Just solidness. The feeling of standing on ground that isn't going anywhere. Word got back to Terrence eventually. I don't know the exact path. My mom has a sister. Her sister talks to people. People talk to Gloria. The route doesn't really matter. What matters is that sometime in September, about 4 months after the wedding, I got a phone call from a number I recognized and almost didn't answer. I was at my desk going through a vendor invoice. Nothing dramatic. I looked at the name on the screen for a few seconds. Then I picked up. Dominic. His voice was different from how it sounds at family dinners. Quieter. More careful with itself. "Hey, Uncle T." A brief pause. "I've been hearing things about what you've been building." I didn't say anything. "Sounds like you've done well for yourself," he said. "The facility company. I've been working hard at it, yeah." Another pause. Longer. I could hear him on the other end deciding something, whether to go directly at it or come at it sideways. He chose sideways, which was always going to be his choice. "I know some people in property management," he said. "Good contacts. People who are always looking for reliable service providers. I thought maybe I could make some introductions. Help you grow the client base." I leaned back in my chair. Looked at the ceiling for a second. "I appreciate that," I said. "But I'm in a pretty solid place with my current clients. Good referral pipeline. I think we're okay." A beat. Sure. No rush. Just, the offer's there if you need it." "I hear you." Silence for a moment. Then, "That thing at Brianna's wedding, Dom. I want you to know that wasn't." "You don't need to explain it," I said. "I know, but I just want to." "Uncle T." Same tone. Same warmth, or whatever warmth was there. "You really don't need to explain it." The silence that followed was different from his usual silences. His usual silences are deliberate. He uses them like his watch, as a kind of display. This one was just a man who had run out of the thing he came with and was standing in the gap. "Right," he said eventually. "Well, you take care of yourself." "You too," I said. I hung up, put the phone face down on the desk, and went back to the vendor invoice. Found my place on the page. Kept working. No moment of triumph. No particular feeling I needed to sit with. Just a phone call that had ended, and work that was still there, and an afternoon that continued the way afternoons do. Which was, I realized, exactly how it was supposed to feel. Christmas that year was at my parents' house for the first time in as long as I could remember. My mom had suggested it, my dad had agreed, and nobody pushed back, which was itself something. I came with a good bottle of wine and stayed the whole afternoon, which I rarely did. My sisters were there with their partners, and the mood was easy in the way family moods can be when the person who makes everyone perform isn't running the room. Terrence and Gloria arrived an hour after everyone else, which meant they walked into a room already warm and comfortable. A room that didn't shift dramatically to accommodate their entrance the way it used to. Terrence shook hands. Gloria hugged people. They found seats. I noticed Gloria watching me more than once. Watching me talk with my sisters, watching me help my dad in the kitchen, watching me tell a story to Janelle's boyfriend that made the whole table laugh. Watching like she was trying to locate something she'd missed. Near the end of the evening, Terrence found me in the kitchen. Just the two of us for a moment. I was rinsing a few glasses. He stood in the doorway. "You've done well, Dominic," he said. I turned off the tap, turned to look at him. He was almost 60 now. The watch was still on the outside of his sleeve. But something in his face was different. Not humble. Exactly. I don't think Terrence would know what to do with humility, but something quieter than I'd seen before. Something that had run out of whatever was fueling it. "I'm doing good work," I said. which is different from doing well, and I meant the difference. He nodded. There was a moment where I think he might have said something else, taken a different turn towards something more honest. But whatever it was didn't come out. Instead, he said, Marcus is thinking about starting something of his own. A business. Maybe you could talk to him sometime. I dried my hands on the dish towel. Tell him to call me, I said. And that was it. I want to be clear about something before I finish this. Terrence didn't become a good person. Gloria didn't transform into someone whose warmth didn't have a purpose. Marcus didn't become my best friend. The family didn't gather around me and weep and apologize for 7 years of making me feel like a cautionary tale at their dinner table. That's not how real life works. And honestly, that's fine. What changed was the weight of it. That's the only way I know how to describe it. At some point. I couldn't tell you exactly when. Maybe gradually. Maybe one morning I just woke up and it was different. Their opinions stopped being load-bearing. It stopped being something I organized my internal life around. When I was 23 and Terrence made a joke about my job at a family dinner, it went home with me. I carried it for days. I'd replay it while I was driving, while I was working, while I was trying to sleep. I'd build counter-arguments in my head, have whole imaginary conversations where I said exactly the right thing, and everyone at the table finally understood what they'd been doing. At 30, when I thought about any of those moments, the book inscription, the barbecue, the wedding, it was like looking at a photograph from a long time ago. I could see what was in it. I could recognize the people, but it didn't pull at me. It had no charge. That's the actual thing. Not the Whitmore contract, not the revenue numbers, not the way James Whitfield looked at me when he recalibrated whatever story he'd initially told about the man standing in the corridor holding a trash bag. Those things matter, and I'm not going to pretend they don't, because I worked for them and I'm allowed to feel good about them. But the real thing is internal. The capacity to stand at a family dinner and feel exactly nothing you didn't choose to feel. No hunger for validation. No bitterness looking for somewhere to land. Just a clean, quiet absence where all that weight used to live. That's what the years built. Not a business. The business is just the external version, the thing you can show people when they ask what you've been up to. The real thing is the internal one. The ability to be handed a trash bag at a wedding and take it from someone's hand without your hands shaking, without your face changing, without a single word. Because you've already built something they don't know about. Because you're already somewhere they can't reach. Not geographically. Emotionally. You've moved, and they're still standing in the same spot, making the same gestures, expecting the same reaction. And you just aren't there anymore. The trash bag is still in my desk drawer. I found it a few months after the wedding when I was cleaning the drawer out, and I thought about throwing it away, and then I didn't. Not as a monument to anything. Not as motivation or a reminder of a hard night. Honestly, it's just a little funny. In the way things become funny when you're far enough away from them that the hurt has gone out, and what's left is just the shape of the story. A man hands you a garbage bag at a wedding to embarrass you, and 10 minutes later the venue director is asking for your card. And a few months after that, that venue is your client. And a year after that, your uncle is calling to ask if you can help his son. I don't know what Terrence expected to happen when he held out that bag. Whatever it was, I don't think it was this. I still do commercial cleaning. Not personally. I have a team for that. People who are good at the work and paid well for it, and who I make sure know that what they do has value, because it does. But Apex started because I was willing to do work that my family thought was beneath me, and it became real because I paid attention while I was doing it. The beginning wasn't a detour from the story. It was the story. My dad spent years building something real in a country that wasn't his to begin with, doing work that was sometimes unglamorous, keeping his head down, paying attention. I watched that growing up and thought I understood it. I understand it better now. If you made it this far, you probably know a Terrence. Maybe you've sat at a table like that one. Maybe someone has handed you something meant to diminish you, and you've had to decide what your face was going to do about it. The exit isn't through the argument. It never was. It's through the work. The quiet, patient, nobody watching work. Do that long enough, and the rest of it figures itself out.